disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness.
You may be seated. A New York City cab driver was driving from one place to the next with a passenger in the back seat. When the passenger wanted to tell the cab driver something, so the passenger tapped the cab driver on the shoulder. Immediately, the cab driver jumped, and he lost control of the car. The car careened off a light pole, ran over a fire hydrant, water was gushing everywhere. The car went sailing into the front of a store and ended up stopping about halfway into the storefront. After making sure that no one was hurt, the cab driver turned around to the passenger and said, I'm so sorry, but your tapping me on the shoulder really startled me." The passenger said, "Startled you? You're a New York City cab driver. Nothing should startle you." And the cab driver said, "I suppose that's true. It's just that this is my first day driving a cab. For the past 25 years, I've been driving a hearse." It's good to laugh, isn't it? It's good to laugh in church. I remember a time, and maybe some of you do too, that you weren't supposed to laugh in church. In fact, I specifically remember being taught in Sunday school that to laugh in God's house was disrespectful and irreverent. And I'm thankful that that's changed. I'm glad that we can smile and even laugh in church sometimes and know that that's okay and it's good and that God blesses that. And laughter truly is good. According to the Mayo Clinic, laughter is beneficial for your health. Did you know that too much stress can slow down your circulatory system by as much as 35%? A good laugh can change that. It can actually stimulate your heart and lungs to increase circulation for up to 45 minutes, just with one laugh. Apparently, laughing makes your internal organs healthier too. It sends feel-good endorphins running throughout your body, and it makes you feel more relaxed. Laughing improves your immune system. It relaxes tight muscles. It can reduce or even eliminate some kinds of pain. A Johns Hopkins University study one time showed that laughing increases the effectiveness of tumor and disease-fighting cells. Laughter decreases the frequency of colds, and laughter helps increase memory and even helps to stave off dementia. So I don't think there's any doubt about it. Laughter helps you live longer and have a better quality of life. As they say, laughter is good medicine, right? And if there's any doubt about that, a University of Maryland study concluded that people who were diagnosed with heart disease were 40% less likely to have laughed in the years leading up to their heart disease than people who didn't get heart disease at all. The study concludes with this wonderful prescription, and now consider this is a very formal medical paper that's written, and I'm going to read to you word for word what their final prescription is at the end of this paper. Quote, "If there is an absence of genuinely funny people in your life, it may well be worth trying to track some down to make you laugh, even if you look kind of weird while you're doing it." 19th century American psychologist and physician William James once said this. He said, people don't laugh because they're happy. They're happy because they laugh. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Bottom line, laughter is a good and necessary part of human life, and I hope and I pray that each one of you is getting lots of opportunities to laugh these days when you read the papers or listen to the news, and it seems like there's so much not to laugh about. Well, today's Old Testament reading is a story about a good laugh. Did you know that in the 17th and 18th chapters of Genesis, that's the only place in all of the Bible where someone is specifically named who laughed? There are stories in the Bible about generic groups of people that laugh. For instance, the 5th chapter of Mark's Gospel says that some people laughed when Jesus said that the daughter of Jairus was not really dead, but was alive. The 1st chapter of the book of Lamentations says that Jerusalem's enemies laughed over Jerusalem's downfall. Again, a group of people. In the Old Testament book of 2 Chronicles, King Hezekiah sends some messengers out urging people to observe the Passover. And when they go out to do just that, that particular book of the Bible says that people laugh them to scorn and mock them. Again, groups of people laughing, and there's lots of that in the Bible. There are also lots of places in the Bible where laughter in general is spoken of. So, for instance, you're familiar with the verse in Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, that says there's a time to weep and a time to laugh. In Luke's version of the Beatitudes, Jesus said, "Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh." And the Psalms and Proverbs are full of verses about laughter. But only here, in the Old Testament story that Ramona read a few minutes ago, in the 17th and 18th chapters of Genesis, does the Bible say a specifically named person laughed. And in this case, it's two people and their husband and wife, Abraham and Sarah. And they laughed about the same thing. They were old and they were told they were going to have a baby. Genesis 17 describes Abraham's laugh this way, and I want you to try to picture this. Genesis 17:17. Abraham fell on his face and laughed. Can you picture that? He said, "Shall a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who's 90 years old, bear a son?" He's saying all this while he's on his face. He can't even stand up. Then a chapter later, in the 18th chapter of Genesis, Sarah joins him in laughter, and it's certainly not hard to understand why. She was 90 years old, okay? Now we have women in this church who are 90 years old or in their 90s, and we have other women in this church who are getting close to that. If that's you, imagine somebody knocking on your door and saying, "Oh, by the way, next time I knock on your door, you're going to be pregnant." Now, my guess is you'd do one of three things. You would say, "Don't knock on my door." Or you would say, "This is some kind of crazy dream. Wake up." Or you would out and out riotously laugh and tell that person how ludicrous it is that they're even thinking such a thing. You'd laugh because there's nothing else to do but laugh. Words alone wouldn't be anywhere near adequate to express what you're thinking and feeling. One of my favorite books is a book that's called The Gospel as Comedy and Tragedy. And basically, the idea of this book is it says that there are stories and there are verses in the Bible that are so deeply tragic that one can only be left to just erupt in tears or maybe even in anger. But there are other stories and verses in the Bible that are just plain outrageously funny. But you see, the problem is we've been conditioned from an early age not to laugh at the Bible. Oh, don't laugh at that. Don't laugh in church. Don't laugh when you hear that story. It's disrespectful. But what if we allowed ourselves to do just that when we hear those funny stories? Like the story in the Bible where Naaman's donkey turns around and talks to him. How can that not be funny? You did it a couple Sundays ago when Jill read the story of the first Pentecost. She read the part where people were all of a sudden speaking in these languages. They were speaking fluently in foreign languages that they'd never even heard before, let alone studied. They're speaking these languages. And then she read the part where it says, skeptics among them concluded, oh, they're all drunk. To which Peter responds, oh, how can they be drunk? It's not even 9 o'clock in the morning. And I heard some of you snicker when that was read. Why did you snicker? Well, because it's funny. You saw in your mind the image of certain people speaking these strange languages and others watching them jumping to the conclusion, well, they must be drunk, and then still somebody else saying they can't be drunk, it's not even 9 o'clock in the morning, as if it's not possible to be drunk at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's a whole lot of humor to that. And many of you saw it, and so you laughed. And now here we are again, with yet another one of the Bible's hilarious stories. Only this time it's not about drinking, it's about having a baby. So imagine how it must have been. A 90-year-old woman resting in her tent, possibly taking a nap, like lots of 90-year-old people do in the afternoon. 3 men suddenly appear. Abraham is sitting outside the tent. He sees these men and he runs to greet them. Now, whatever it was that moved him to do so, he overwhelmed them with extraordinary hospitality. And many sermons have been preached about Abraham's welcoming of strangers. He greets them. He gives them bread and water. He never thinks the worst about them, only thinks the best about them. He barbecues them a fresh steak. He offers them shade and rest. All of these wonderful things he does. And then finally one of them says to him, so, where's your wife, Sarah? Now wait a minute. How did he know Abraham's wife's name was Sarah? Nowadays we would be a little suspicious, right? But not Abraham. Abraham still pours out this generosity. And so he points and he answers, oh, she's over there in the tent. And that's when one of the men blurts it out. The next time I come to see you, when the seasons come around again, your wife will have a son. And it was actually Sarah who responded first. Apparently she was eavesdropping in the tent. She'd woken up from her nap. She's wondering what these strangers are doing there. And what's her response? She laughs out loud, the Bible says. Now maybe it was only like that, and then she put her hand over her mouth so as not to be heard anymore. But she laughed. She couldn't help it. After all, whoever this guy is, he obviously doesn't know that I'm 90 years old. And this is where the language of the story changes. Now, all of a sudden, it's the Lord speaking. In other words, God was there the whole time. It's God who heard Sarah laugh. Did I hear Sarah laugh? God rhetorically asks. Who, me? Sarah says. And the whole idea of it is just hilarious. Here she is trying to bite her finger so as not to laugh anymore. I didn't laugh. Why would I laugh? It wasn't me. It wasn't. As if there's some way she could pull the wool over God's eyes. And then comes the last line of the story, which is so wonderful. Right after Sarah says, it wasn't me. I didn't laugh. The last line of the story. I love this line. God says, oh, yes, you did laugh. And I can just hear and see God chuckling as the words are spoken, chuckling for the fact that Sarah chuckled and then tried to cover it up, as if God didn't know. Chuckling more than anything because she knew that deep in her soul, God is God, and God is going to get the last laugh. Sarah might think she knows what's possible, but God is the one who truly does know what's possible. There's one intensely powerful line in this story that says it all, and each and every one of us ought to have this line on the mirrors of our bathroom and on our refrigerator doors and on the walls of our house, where we look at it and we see it multiple times a day. And that verse is Genesis 18, verse 14. And the verse says this: "Is anything too wonderful for the Lord?" Today we're invited to consider that possibility for our own lives, that nothing is too wonderful for the Lord. Sometimes I think that we, like Sarah, tend to think that some things are too wonderful for the Lord. Too impossible, too ridiculous to even think about. As a teenager, I remember laughing, maybe even crying, because I was sure that my parents couldn't possibly understand me. And I'm sure I told them 1,000 times, "You don't understand me." And then I became a parent of a teenager, and guess what? I found myself laughing that my teenagers thought I didn't understand them. We laugh for all kinds of reasons. We laugh at things that are funny. We laugh when laughing is easier than crying. We laugh at the notion that we'll ever get over a deep hurt, or that life will ever get back to normal again after a setback, or that we'll ever be able to deal with a new normal. That phrase, new normal, we keep hearing. Will we ever be able to deal with that? Some people laugh to think they'll ever find that one place in the world where they truly, truly belong. We laugh at the thought that we'll ever be strong enough or courageous enough to get through the difficult challenge we're facing. Many of us have laughed at the notion that God might be calling us to do the one thing we never thought in a million years that we could ever do, like being a pastor. I still get a good laugh at that, and my high school and college friends even get a bigger laugh over it. I remember how a very distraught 37-year-old man one time came up to me, member of my church. He came up to me and he told me how alone he felt. He had just broken up with a longtime girlfriend. He told me how much he really wanted to find that one person to share his life with, and he thought that person was right, but it turned out not to be right. And he laughed when I told him, just be patient. Be patient, because I know that the right person is eventually going to come along for you. And he laughed. He said, I'm 37 years old. I'm getting old. How about that? 37 is old. I can't be patient any longer, he said. It wasn't even a month later that the woman of his dreams came into his life, and 6 weeks later, I officiated at their wedding. And that was 29 years ago, and they've built a beautiful family. We laugh Sarah's laugh, not because we have faith, or even because we lack faith, but because we find ourselves in circumstances that require an impossible faith. God can't do that. See, that's the notion that Abraham and Sarah had gotten used to. They had reached a dead end. They adjusted to it. They weren't going to have the children that God promised that they were going to have. Okay, fine, move on. Let's just get on with life. And we do that, don't we? We get comfortable letting go of hopes and dreams. We get to the point where believing God can and will do a new thing in our lives seems frankly nonsensical and laughable. We prepare ourselves for everything except the possibility that with God all things truly are possible. I'm sure that Sarah knew, intellectually at least, that if God wanted a 90-year-old woman to have a baby, God could do it. After all, can that be anything more difficult than creating the universe? But it's one thing to nod your head and accept in principle the idea that God can bring an old woman's womb to life. If you would have asked Sarah, Sarah, do you think that God can do anything? She probably would have said, oh yes, absolutely. But if you would have asked her, do you believe that God is going to bless you, Sarah, with a baby at the age of 90, I'm guessing she would have had a much different response. Maybe she would have even laughed. Oh wait, she did. For some reason, when we try to apply the principle, God can do anything, to ourselves, our own lives, it's a tough sell. You believe that God can do anything intellectually, but do you truly believe that God can do anything in your life? You see, that's the question. That's where we get stuck. Today's Bible story reminds us to never let go of that hope and promise. The notion may be laughable, but the truth is God will get the last laugh. Next time you find yourself looking in the mirror, once again holding up what you perceive to be your unimpressive self against the brilliance of what you think you could or should be, and you find yourself laughing. I can't do that. That's impossible. That's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. It's too big a dream. Remember Genesis 18:14. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Like Sarah, we may laugh at the possibilities, but God laughs at the obstacles. With God, all things are possible. And I want to share with you this one last thought. Jim Valvano, a lot of you sports fans know Jim Valvano. He was former basketball coach of North Carolina State University. He was one of the most highly respected, successful, and inspirational people ever to come out of the sports world. Tragically, he was diagnosed with cancer and died in 1993 at the age of 47. But before he died, in fact, just before he died, he gave a very memorable speech at the ESPY Awards banquet in Los Angeles, a speech that really defined his legacy. It's often repeated, and this very day it's printed on his grave marker. Essentially, this is what he said. He said, "To me, there are three things we should do every day of our life. Number one, we should laugh. Laugh every day. Number two, think. Spend some time in thought. And number three, have your emotions moved to tears. Now, it could be tears of happiness or tears of joy, but experience tears." Think about it, he said. If you laugh, think, and cry, that's a full day. That's a heck of a day. Do that 7 days a week, and you've got something special. Jim Valvano was exactly right. Laugh, think, and cry. Today, I especially ask you to remember to laugh. Just for the fun of it, laugh. But make sure you also laugh at what life might look like when God gets the last laugh in your life. Amen. Let's stand and join singing "I Was There to Hear Your Morning Cry."